Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Spartan Nation Radio. I appreciate you being here. We now bring in Spartan Nation senior writer Johnny Shop for the state of MSU athletics. John, let's dig right in. Spartan Nation is not reporting this as factual because Mark Dantonio isn't talking to the media, but it was in my War Room article, talking to multiple coaches who are at the American Football Coaches Association recently, and then talking to people close to the program. The thing I keep hearing is that Jim Bowman is going to be moved to a senior analyst role, and that will open the door for Dantonio to bring Harlan Barnett back, and that Terrence Samuel will probably not return. Now, we're not reporting this as fact. We're telling you what we're hearing from guys who are at the coaches convention, who are talking to people, and what we're hearing from people around Spartan football. Dantonio's not talking, so there's nothing to confirm. If those are factual and that is what happened, we're told that they would bring in, obviously, in place of Bowman, another offensive assistant. It's someone who could possibly be a coordinator or a co-coordinator or literally just coach a position. I am told by multiple people, they all said the same thing. Could be a coordinator or not, that discussion's still going on. Is that enough to satisfy John Shop?
Well, first of all, I'm shaking my head. Harlan Barnett's great, but can he coach the offensive line?
Well, no, but remember now, Terrence Samuel is over on the defense now.
I don't care who's where. You got to start with the offensive line if you're going to compete in the Big Ten East. All I do is look around here and see what's going on. Kerry Coombs going back to Ohio State is a big deal. It makes sense. It makes sense, and it's a big deal. What's the biggest deal for Michigan State football? They got to be better at the point of attack on the offensive side. And until I hear Jeff Stoutland coming back or somebody else is coming who is confident to coach the offensive line, I don't think it really matters very much if Harlan Barnett's coming back. It's nice to have him back, but he's not the position of need that they've got to address. If you're going to slide anybody around, and you've got to figure out who is going to coach and lead this offensive line. So, no, Michigan State football is not doing anything yet that suggests they're going to move an inch forward in the Big Ten East. I saw Matt Canada signed to be a head quarterback coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers, for example. You take him off the board as a guy that could come in. No, all I see is the entire world of major college football is moved into 2020, and Michigan State football looks like they've got their feet stuck in the ground from a couple years back.
John, I'm just going to ask you point blank. You said that's not enough. I'm told by someone in the Spartan Fund that Mark Dantonio's decision with his staff last year made raising money incredibly difficult. And they told me that if he doesn't make major changes to his staff, that he was going to blank them. And you can use whatever word you want, but it's a four-letter word, and it's one I can't say on the radio. I understand Mark Dantonio is safe. Neither you nor I are calling for him to be fired. But when 18,000 people show up on Senior Day and your Spartan Fund is struggling to raise money, it's not good, is it?
No, it's a sign of an era getting ready to expire and fall on itself is what it looks like. Listen, we talked about this before, and some folks around Michigan State, they need to be woken up to this. You cannot compete in the Big Ten East if you cannot compete at the point of attack. You will never win the Big Ten East again unless you can do so. Some of us, like me, thought, well, maybe that's not the most important thing as this game has changed a little bit. Wrong. We got reminded royally this fall how bad it can be if you can't block. Forget it. You're never going to beat all, let alone one or two of the teams that are in the Big Ten East. You're just not going to beat them. As I mentioned earlier this fall, Michigan State football needs to make a dramatic and radical commitment to be the very best offensive line in the Big Ten East. It needs to be a long-term commitment that they got to find some funds to support. And I realize that may not happen with this coaching staff since those dollars have dried up. But I claim that that is the minimum it will take for Michigan State to be able to compete at the point of attack on the offensive side of the ball. You see what I'm saying there? You got to commit that we're going to be the best just to have a shot to compete with Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State on an annual basis. And in case you're sleeping on my Maryland Terps from the DMV, understand that they're going to be well funded. And unlike Rutgers, there is a possibility that Maryland will be able to compete in the Big Ten East sometime in this decade. So Michigan State football is sitting there. I don't know what they're doing other than with their feet in the sand. Everybody else around the country is moving in the direction needed to position themselves to compete in 2020. It's not that Michigan State football is throwing up a white flag. It's just that it seems like Michigan State football is throwing up a white flag that, you know what, we don't need to compete for championships anymore. We're kind of okay where we are. So who's going to come in to lead the offensive line? Because I wouldn't care what Michigan State does this offseason, realigning coaches. If they want to put the names in the hat and flip them over here, bring back Harlan Barnett, great. Glad to see him back. Bring in somebody else to consult, whatever. Who's going to coach the offensive line? Because otherwise, who are you going to beat in the East next year? That's the question I've got. It's going to stick in my head all off season long.
John, what do you think about Dantonio continually bringing back people or people he's got relationship with and not being willing to go outside the program? Many people have said Ron Burton was his best hire and there was no relationship with Burton. And I know that people have been perplexed over this. I'm just curious what you think, and then I want to follow it up by saying, just answer that one first.
Yeah. Well, look, when you talk about Ron Burton, we were on this show talking about, hey, what do you think of Ron Burton? And he did not fit the profile of the coach I was hoping that they would acquire at that point. But he's been a fantastic fit for Michigan State football and a fantastic coach. When I think about the amazing line of coaches that Mark Dantonio has worked with at Michigan State and other places. We just saw Dean Pease retire, for example. Great name from the early Saban days alongside Dantonio. There's plenty of good folks there. There's plenty of folks that maybe are worth taking a look at or recycle. And there's also folks that probably are not. There's some folks that aren't in coaching anymore. So if I'm thinking about, I've got an offensive line guy, for example, I may be asking a Jeff Stoutland, hey, who's a young guy that we can go get? Or I may be reaching out to, call me crazy, Dante Sarnecchia is pretty good offensive line coach, the guy that kind of orchestrates the offensive line for the New England Patriots. Those are kind of folks that if you want to compete in the East, may be able to point you in the right direction. So I'd be very concerned of any coach in the Big Ten East who wants to compete for that championship, who's not reaching out and trying to connect with the very best people in the sport at the college and pro level to get them to point in the right direction. Should one of those names on the list happen to be somebody that has come across Dantonio in the past, great. If not, it shouldn't disqualify him anymore. Michigan State football has suffered a little bit from Dantonio going back in the past and bringing in guys who, quite frankly, weren't really tearing up other places. Mark Snyder is a name that comes to mind. And when you compare that with the statement that Dantonio made at the end of his introductory press conference at Michigan State in 2006, which I believe you were in attendance for, it's kind of quite concerning, to be honest with you, because it's almost like what he laid out then, somewhere along the lines here in more recent years, he's kind of gone against 180 degrees from where he laid it out back in 2006.
Interesting times. John, what do you think of the Nick Saban philosophy that you want 25% turnover on your staff every year and you want to go find guys from outside your program who are highly successful so you can constantly be getting fresh ideas and be germinating new wrinkles, and compare that to Michigan State?
Well, I think I would have liked to hear it when he was at Michigan State. In a way, Saban was doing that without yet having entrenched it as a philosophy. But Nick Saban is a rare figure in that he has continued to learn and get better deep into his professional career. And this is something that he's really only laid out in the latter third of his career. I do think it's very important. I think it's probably more important than we realize. And I'm not one for always the newest, latest, greatest thing, but you got to have your head in the sand if you don't realize that college football has changed in the last 5 years. You got to have your head in the sand if you don't think that it's going to be a game dominated by quarterbacks that are dual threat nature from here forward. You further have to have your head in the sand if you don't think those kind of quarterbacks are coming to play in the Big Ten East, because as some folks know, Justin Fields was originally a Penn State recruit, commit, then he ends up going to Georgia for a year, and he's at Ohio State. So there's two, if you want to count him twice, that have been recruited in the Big Ten East. So I think you are really without a choice at this conference and in this division than to try to stay on the cutting edge. And you're not going to stay on the cutting edge if you're just looking to hire from a kind of a cyclone, an internal thing with walls that you just kind of look around the Big Ten or where you've been in the past. You're going to have to reach out. So if I was Mark Dantonio and I was seriously going to change my offensive philosophy, which he's not going to, I would have wanted to talk to somebody like a Graham Harrell at Southern Cal to hear why would the air raid work or not work at Michigan State. I might want to pick the brain of wild card Kenya Matalono at Navy to understand, is there anything you can do with the triple option if you're not an option team? And I would want to cover all the ground in between. I don't think there's any other way to have success at the top level of college football anymore without staying on the cutting edge. And I don't think you stay on the cutting edge if you stick with the same staff you've had in the past. Sure, that kind of staff where it was the same guys for decades, that's over. Never going to happen again. The kind of staff that Frank Beamer had at Virginia Tech, a lot of the same names for a long time, that's over. It will never happen again at major college football. The stakes are too big. The dollars are too big. Look at the major coordinator shuffling we've seen. Bo Pelini's names in the mix. Jerry Coombs going back to Ohio State. Look at the coordinators at the major schools. This game ain't changing anymore. So if you want to play at that level, those are the stakes. If you want to run a nice program that's not going to compete for, a division championship, let alone something more, you may see some more continuity there. But otherwise, you better have your eyes open at all times to be on the cutting edge, the best that you can be if you're in this major college football environment. It is not the same as it was when Dantonio began.
John, lastly, what did you think about our reporting about players who are from the pre-Dantonio era being very frustrated because they're recommending guys that they coach or that are family, and they're essentially being ignored by the staff? I mean, they're saying it. What do you think of that?
I think a couple things. Number one, this kind of scenario happens all the time across the country in major college football programs. Whether it's people from Southern Cal barking about what happened at Southern Cal, whether it was the late, great Bubba Smith barking about a player he tried to point Michigan State to back in, I think, the early 2000s or maybe the 90s, or whether it's 15 years down the road at Ohio State. This kind of stuff happens pretty often. There are only so many scholarship spots, only so many recurring dollars. But that doesn't mean there's not a better way to handle it. I believe I remember a story of Joe DeLamielleure when after Nick Saban was hired at Michigan State, running into the same kind of ground. So I'm not surprised by it. I'm not overly concerned by it. Here's what I am concerned about. Mark Dantonio is one of the great evaluators of talent in college football history. There's no question of that. It's unbelievable if you go back through his history. He was a great developer of talent for a very long time as a head football coach, but that has since not gone as well in recent years. My concern would only lie in this, in his ability to consistently evaluate major college football talent. If that talent has dropped off, then I'd be concerned. I'm not as concerned about guys from the past saying, hey, they won't even take a look or pay attention to what we're saying. I get how resources are limited in that fashion, and I promise you it doesn't just happen at Michigan State.
So, John, we now turn our attention to the Spartans and to the offseason, which I find fascinating. I was told privately not to expect Mark Dantonio to speak until spring ball. I was told that he'll probably speak at Pro Day, but do what he did last year and say only questions about Pro Day, nothing else, and then be silent to the rest of the season. And if he'd made changes, probably send out a release. I was also told by the same person in the Spartan Fund that he obviously didn't learn his lesson from last year because he brought all of the anger and angst from the fans into the spring, and they didn't get a chance to get a clean break from it. You are an attorney. You're also right for us, but you're an attorney. If he were your client, and obviously he's done nothing legal, we're not talking about that, but at some point he's going to have to answer the questions that Mark Hollis told you not to sign Austin Robertson, and you had to get permission to do it, but or allegedly he's going to have to answer that. He's going to have to answer questions about his staff. He still is going to have to answer the question that from 3 months ago that he called a dumbass from me. I mean, there are a lot of hard questions that are going to continue to bring the filth into the future. How would you advise him? Now, listen, I want to make this clear. He doesn't owe Hondo Carpenter anything. I want to make that very abundantly clear. He owes Hondo nothing. But let's not also pretend that he's been a volunteer, John. He hasn't been, Mother Teresa and been a volunteer. The Michigan State Spartan fans and the university have made him a multimillionaire many times over. And I'm sorry, he was paid nearly $9 million in 13 months. They deserve to have answers. They deserve to have questions answered before they renew their season tickets. Or am I completely wrong?
No. Basically, what you'd have to do is advise Mark Dantonio that he really needs to enter somewhat of a crisis management mode. I would consider the record of the football team since the Badger Bob of 2016 to pretty much be a crisis, and especially 2018 and 2019. So in that kind of a situation, the advice would be to get out in front of this as best you can, explain to people what you're doing and why you're doing it. Most of the great majority of fans, they're going to pretty much accept that if you are straight with them. They may not necessarily agree with you. They may say, hey, I wish we were running a different offense, or we had a different coach here or there, or we were doing something else with the quarterback, but they're going to respect it. In 2020, to sit there and put your head in the sand and try to say, I know best is ridiculous. It's like Lloyd Carr's approach. Great football coach, dramatically underrated and underappreciated coach. But he came off too often like it's because I said so and I know what's best for Michigan. And that worked pretty well for a long time. It wouldn't work in 2020. Kirby Smart is a guy that has had way more success at Georgia than many would have expected. Hadn't been a head coach before, but he is all over the place, out in front as much as he can with everything that goes on with Georgia. He's got his hands full right now as they are struggling with the success that they've had in recent years. But let's watch and see what happens to Georgia. Let's see if they slip slide as bad as Michigan State football did. Even if they do or they don't, Smart is a guy that's going to stay out in front. He understands how much he needs to market his football program and how much fans today and donors today demand communication from their head coach's office. The era of Lloyd Carr and what Saban has at Alabama, those are things of the past. We're not going to see those anymore. So Mark Dantonio does himself zero favors taking the approach he's taking right now. He should be up front and explain what he's doing and why with Spartan Nation as soon as possible.
Here's the problem. I do know for a fact there have been people that have tried to get him to talk more, and but he has no boss. I mean, technically, Bill Beekman is, but Bill Beekman is not firing him. So he really, I mean, Mark Hollis was his boss. They had some interesting discussions when.
And they should.
Yeah, but there's nobody doing that. I don't believe anybody internally that works in the SID office is. I don't know this, but I don't know that anyone there is strong enough to sit him down and say, you need to do this. This is, you're hurting us. You're hurting yourself. And I don't know. I'm not saying no one is strong enough. I'm saying I don't necessarily think it because I've been told by people there that there isn't. I don't know that. But I'm going to tell you something. I do know he's been told that, and he still does whatever he wants. And the thing is people will say to me, Hondo, he doesn't owe you anything. I totally agree. Mark Dantonio doesn't know Hondo Carpenter. I think he can give me the big finger and just say walk away. I mean, I'm not talking to you. That's his decision. I don't think he gets it. These fans want to believe in him. They want to believe it's coming back. They want to believe in him. I don't think either, and I said this to a very prominent member of Michigan State recently. He either doesn't care or doesn't have a clue. There is no middle ground. He either doesn't care or doesn't have a clue. Because if he had a care, he would absolutely go out and say, I'll answer anything you want. Ask me anything you want to ask me. I don't care. But there is a lot. I mean, another question I'd even say earlier. I asked him before the season, are you concerned about the Curtis Blackwell lawsuit becoming a distraction? No. Okay? It has now. Because now he's going to have to answer questions about Austin Robertson. Now, he may not answer them. He's going to be asked them because they're legitimate. They're legitimate.
Sure.
And, I mean, again, I don't think he gets it, or because I don't want to believe he doesn't care. These fans, John, want to believe in him.
Sure. And that's a horrible spot to be. Number one, all fans want the best coach in school history to be successful, and they want to believe in him. Number two, he's got Tom Izzo on the other side of the street who answers all questions all the time. Is after the season, back up against the wall, our commentary is legendary. So you've got a stark contrast to that. Number three, it sounds like a head coach that is not being held to account. I'm not saying accountability in a bad way, but there needs to be a push and pull. There needs to be an accountability to the greater good. No one man, woman, or child is bigger than Michigan State University, and no one coach, player, or whatever is bigger than Michigan State football. So the idea that one person, no matter who it is walks around, acting like they may be untouchable is really bad, because I'm telling you the obvious. Unless you're Nick Saban and literally the best coach in the history of the sport, you can't get away with that. Not in 2020. So look who shows up this fall. Look whose dollars flow in this off season. And there's one guy who is responsible for what happens in that case. And that is Mark Dantonio. And if he is betting that his 2020 Spartan football team with an unprepared quarterback and who knows what to coach the offensive line and a whole whale of a schedule, if he's betting that team's going to be so good that it's going to wipe all that stuff in the past, I would say his bet is way, way too long of an odds. And I point him back to 2017 when he practically pulled that rabbit out of the hat. And I go back to this once again. If this is all about completing circles, that was the chance to complete the circle and walk right away at win 100.
John, real quick, we got less than a minute, but I want to ask this question. Do you think whether he was going to do no changes, which again, we are not reporting these are definite. This is just what we're hearing from guys who were at the football coaches convention and from guys associated with the program. Do you think he made a mistake, whether he's going to make no changes or some changes by not doing them before now, or do you think that doesn't matter as long as they're done before spring?
Oh, it's a huge mistake. One of the biggest mistakes of his career. Looks ridiculous. Look at Arizona State and Texas. They moved immediately. There's no reason you can't do that before a bowl game. I'm afraid this is going to be the last huge mistake of his career.
Let me just quickly say this, John. I was talking to a head coach, and I'm going to tell you who when we go to commercial, who said to me he said Michigan State is looking at the portal for a quarterback, and if they're going to bring anyone in who's going to be involved in any level with coordinator or quarterback coaching, it is a grave mistake to not have that person on staff so that person can sell your transfer guy what he wants to do. 10 seconds, agree or disagree?
Completely agree. No question at all.
He's the great Johnny Shop, Spartan Nation senior writer. Know him, love him, appreciate him. Talking about the state of Michigan State football, and we'll be back. Football, and we'll be back. Football, and we'll be back. Football.